hit record so I don't forget. Oh, and real quick, sometimes there's this weird read AI thing that pops into the screen and starts recording. If that happens, disregard it. I don't know how to stop it from doing that. It basically wants to take the pod or the transcript and make notes for me. I can't figure out how to stop it. But anyway, in case that comes up and you're like, what in the world?
Yeah.
But other than that, we'll go ahead and get started. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. I'm here in Zoomland, as always, with my man, Steven Fipke, Vice President of North and South America at Inflow Control. But even more important, folks, a fellow Canadian from good old Alberta, Canada. Steven, it's an honor to have you on the show, buddy. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me on. Doing great. Honored to be here.
Sweet, sweet. So before we keep going, I do want to give a huge shout out to Inflow Control. Steven obviously works for Inflow Control, but they were actually the first company out there to support and sponsor the Wicked Energy podcast. So I'm forever grateful. And I'm sure you've seen them all over LinkedIn, but in case you haven't, I do want to plug them because Inflow Control is doing some cool stuff. They're a technology company that helps oil companies improve the efficiency of oil production while reducing the industry's environmental impact with their autonomous inflow control valve. And a lot of times you'll see it in brackets AICV. I'm going to put the link in the show notes because I just think it's fascinating stuff what you guys are doing. I know we weren't going to make this all about them, but again, I really appreciate the support. Everyone out in your Norway office, I had a chance to meet them. I think it was at Was it OTC? Yeah. You guys had a cool display. And so I think what we do in our industry, there's a lot of times really great companies doing fascinating things don't get the recognition they deserve. But again, want to put that out there. And then one more shout out. I want to give a shout out to Brent, my man. He's obviously at Inflow Control as well. A fellow Canadian from Flin Flon, Manitoba. If you haven't listened to the podcast episode I did with him, check it out. He's been all over the world spreading the good word about Inflow. But again, so Steven, sorry, I had to put all that in there. I wasn't going to tell you. Guys. Yeah, you knew. You knew.
Brent's on vacation in Canada right now.
I was just going to ask.
Some time off.
Good for him. And so he's doing good?
Doing great. Yeah. He brought me into the Inflow Control fold 3 years ago. And it was really exciting because I'd watched this company from the sidelines for the better part of a decade.
Yeah.
And we can touch on that later on, how I actually helped them get started in a different capacity.
We'll get there for sure. Well, let's get the audience kind of like warmed up here. It's something that has nothing to do with oil and gas, but it's something. I was flying back from Denver yesterday with the vice president of the company I work for. And I said, man, what are you doing this weekend? He's kind of he's like, man, don't laugh. I'm going to the Barbie movie. And I was like, man, in a weird way, I kind of want to see it. Have you seen the Barbie? All right, first of all, if you have kids, you may or may not have seen it, but have you seen the Barbie movie?
My wife took the kids on opening weekend.
No way.
They loved it. Yeah, I haven't seen it yet. I'm holding out for Oppenheimer. Hopefully on Saturday, I'll get a chance to finally see Oppenheimer.
Okay. No, that's if you had to pick, obviously you're taking Oppenheimer. So no, that we haven't seen it either, but I just thought it was hilarious. And I didn't realize, but it was actually filmed in the Warner Brothers studios in Hertfordshire, which is just north of London. I would have thought they would have filmed it in the US, but for some weird reason, they filmed it in London. No idea why. And then Will Ferrell, who's one of my most favorite actors, apparently plays the Mattel CEO. Did you know that?
Yeah, I'd seen he had a good cameo in that film. Yeah. But I think the reason they do a lot of filming in Ireland, England, and Canada is for tax credits, right?
Okay. I was trying to think. I'm like, there has to be, because it was in a studio, so it wasn't like they needed the background or something. And I was like, it has to be some business related purpose. So taxes, of course, everyone's trying to, take advantage of the opportunities. But no, I just thought that was kind of funny. I did a quick Google search on like random facts about the Barbie movie because it's just been like on my mind because so many people have been like, have you seen the Barbie? Anyway, that's not as much as important as what we're going to talk about. But so Steven, where are you joining from today? So because when we talked about Norway a little bit, we talked about Branson, Saskatchewan. You're from you're from Alberta. Are you from Alberta? Or are you just
born and raised in a little town called Rimbey, west of Red Deer.
I know exactly where Rimbey is. Yes.
You do not. It's tiny, 3,000 people.
No, I stayed in Rimbey because when I was working for Precision Drilling, I stayed in Rimbey like for 2 months straight in like the littlest hotel I can remember. I can visually remember it. And I ate their like gas station breakfast every day on the way to the rig. So I do remember Rimby. Anyway, didn't realize you were
Yeah.
from there. That's good.
No, my grandparents homesteaded just west of Rimby, and they were farmers, but my dad was a rig hand as soon as he could get off to work the rigs, and he's been an oil patch guy ever since. So we lived in grew up in Rimby, but then it was Grand Prairie, then it was Rocky Mountain House, and then it was Fort St. John. And then I
Yeah.
went to high school in Fort St. John in northern British Columbia, which is mile 60 of the Alaska Highway. And it's
Yep.
probably one of the roughest places you could ever want to think of going to high school, but I survived.
Mm. Well, so you're scrappy then. I like that.
Yeah, and then as soon as I got done high school, I went to college in Grand Prairie for a couple of years, and then finally got my petroleum engineering degree from the University of Alberta in Edmonton.
Gotcha. You're one of the actually, I think the only person that I know that's lived in Fort St. John and GP and actually has a degree. Most people get sucked into the abyss and they don't, I don't know if they make it out.
It's a short list, but there's a bunch of petroleum engineering people bumping around Calgary that I went to school with, and a few of them are from up north. Yeah,
That's
but
cool,
not a
man.
lot.
Yeah, no, it's interesting again, for the listeners out there who've never been north of Oklahoma, you're probably like, this is boring, but I just always find it fascinating, getting some folks on that are from Canada. And I mean, you've joined or you've worked all over the world. And how long have you been here in Texas?
Well, off and on for 15 years. Yeah, but yeah,
Okay.
going back to your point about being sucked into the oil patch abyss, I came this close, hey Justin. I was done my first year of engineering, second year of engineering, and I got into the co-op engineering program, and they
Okay.
put me to work as an MWD engineer in the field for Sperry, which became Halliburton. And I'd never made so much money in my life. I
Right.
would probably still be there if my boss didn't threaten to fire me if I didn't go back to school and get my degree.
No kidding. That's well, thank goodness he did. And obviously he did, and it's worked out super well. How are you managing the heat this year? Like,
Oh,
are your AC units still pumping along? I mean, how's it been?
I've had to replace one already this
Oh,
summer. Yeah.
oh, that's the
Yeah.
worst, man. It's been nuts, dude. Yeah. Anyway, it's nothing like back home. I remember growing up, in the Okanagan Valley, and we didn't have AC at night. We'd leave the doors and windows open, just have the nice cool breeze flowing through, and getting up at whether it's 5 or 5:30 for me here lately. It's going outside. And it's in the 80s. It's just like just mind blowing to me. I can't. It's hard to wrap my head around it, man.
Yeah. People will often ask me, my neighbors call me Canada Steve, and they say, "How are you holding up in this heat?" And my answer is always the same. I can tolerate the heat. It's uncomfortable, but it's not as uncomfortable as minus 32 Celsius, which is
Yeah.
also minus 32 Fahrenheit. And in Fort St. John, we would see minus 40, minus 45 for weeks on end. And that's
Oh,
hard to live in. It's hard to live.
it is. No, it's interesting because folks down here, when they get a cool front or they go somewhere cold, it's like, oh, this is so refreshing. And so it's completely flipped. Like for me, I quite like the heat now, although I do like when wintertime gets some seasons and then the cold weather. But to your point, I mean, like when you're like 4, 5, 6 months of just doing everything you can to like keep your car somewhat clean and your house somewhat clean. Cause you just, when you come home, you're muddy boots, shoes, and tracking all sorts of gravel and salt everywhere. It's just like, it's a lot of energy just to,
Oh, shoveling
it's
sidewalks and scraping the ice off your windshield. No,
yeah,
thank you.
I didn't even mention that, getting up and just to get into your car and comfortably, because at least with AC, within 3 minutes, your car's cooling off. Sometimes I'd be driving to work and it would take half an hour for the freaking car to heat up. Like it was crazy, man.
No, I
But
know. Don't
yeah,
miss it. I don't miss it
yeah,
at all.
right on. Well, so kind of wrap, back to technology and oil and gas. I so Inflow's tag is really interesting. It's making better wells, which is fitting for this conversation because for your entire career, and I look back, you've got a long record of really the pursuit of making better wells even before Inflow Control. And so I think it's kind of neat. And so I'm curious, like where it all began. You kind of alluded to it, but it started in the frozen lands of Alberta. But tell us kind of beyond that after you graduated, kind of where you went, and I think that'll really lay a foundation for where you're at now and how you guys are really adding value to the market.
Yeah, I like telling this story, and not a lot of people want to listen to it, but hey, I've got you as a captive audience. But
Yeah,
we call it whip stocks to water control.
very
And
cool.
spans from drilling to completions to production to reservoir engineering. And it started in the year 2000. I graduated as a petroleum engineer in Alberta, and it was not a good business cycle, right? There weren't a lot of jobs. The guys who graduated in 99 were still bartending. And I came out of school looking for a job, expected to go to Calgary and be a reservoir engineer. That didn't work out. I got hired by Halliburton because I had that MWD background as an intern. They hired me into this weird product line called multilaterals, right? And the team in Nisku, Alberta was only half a dozen people, and they were supporting the entire globe in terms of multilateral technology. And it was a fun time in multilaterals. Since then, it's kind of plateaued as the technology matured. But back in those days, Justin, it was the wild, wild west. We were prototyping tools in the workshop. We had this lab, if you want to call it, but it was a giant hydraulic ram that would push a drill bit through a concrete block. And we would create multilateral junctions inside this concrete block in the workshop in Nisku. And just testing different tools, trying this, trying that, and then go to the field and run it in somebody's well. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. I got a really high tolerance for risk and firefighting and damage control because a lot of those systems didn't work. And every multilateral job is a fishing operation. We would go out to a well site with a whipstock and 6 different fishing tools to try and get that whipstock out. And we were remarkably successful. You got to give those early Sperry Sun guys a lot of credit for designing some very clever tools that they're still using to this day, 25 years later.
No kidding. No kidding. And so, I mean, okay, so then you do that. And where did that lead you? Because I was still in Alberta.
Yeah, I was in Alberta. And, you know, I had a bad case of wanderlust. So I would go anywhere. Send me to Saudi Arabia for 3 months, no problem. I would go run jobs in Saudi Arabia, sit out in the summertime heat in Dammam and disarm and rebuild tools for them. And then the market in Venezuela got really hot. We were working for the ConocoPhillips guys. They had that Petrozaguata heavy oil project, and they were doing more multilaterals than anybody else on the planet for the space of about 5 years there. So I would go down there and support them with new technology stuff. And eventually that got me the job as the multilateral product line manager of Venezuela in 2004. So I was an expat by the time I was 26 years old.
And that was still Halliburton. And so for those who may not be familiar with, say, subsurface well construction or well design, can you just high level describe what multilateral is? Because I think people have an idea, but I just want to make sure people understand what that is.
No, happily, because I have a lot of passion for this. You know, multilaterals is when you drill a single vertical well, and you either go horizontally or keep it vertical, but then you branch off. So there's actually, if you look it up, there's an organization called TAML, the Technological Association for Multilaterals. And they have 6 different categories of multilateral junctions. So the junction was where all the technology was designed, you know. So there's level 1, which is just an open hole sidetrack, which is very common in Canada, right? A lot of those heavy oil wells are open hole with open hole sidetracks. There's no junction per se, just rock. And there's level 2, which has a cased main bore, open hole lateral. Level 3 has cased in both laterals. Level 4 is cemented junctions. Level 5 is a sealed junction. And level 6 is like a expandable junction, really briefly. But we were specialists in level 4 cemented junctions. So we would go into those heavy oil fields and they would do open hole laterals, but then they would stack up these like pitchfork multilaterals, one on top of the other. So the record NO18-3, I think, had 18 laterals in a single well.
Wow. So when they, sorry, go ahead with what?
It was 3 multilateral junctions with 6 open hole sidetracks per junction.
Gotcha. So, yeah, it is fascinating. The first time I remember hearing about that, I think when I was working for CES up in Canada, and I think we were doing some work for Shell in their Groundbridge field, and I remember did some wellbore diagrams and stuff looking. I was like, this is fascinating. But now fast forward to today, I just would imagine that like they would have to I mean, I would imagine that these multilaterals, they can produce an astronomical amount of oil and gas, but if you're only producing through one vertical section, I mean, I would imagine are they producing them all they're not all producing all at once, right? Like they're kind of
Yeah,
like
they're all
isolating
commingled. Yeah,
or oh
it's the
yeah.
technique is used to be called MRC, maximizing reservoir contact. So these are very heavy oil wells, heavier than even we get in Canada, but just a little bit higher temperature, so it flows easier. So
Gotcha.
by getting all that reservoir contact and allowing the fish bones would kind of go in the upwards direction, so you get gravity drainage into the main bore, and they could get 2,000 or 3,000 barrels a day out of those wells with a PCP pump from Kudu, also Canada.
Yeah.
Whereas a single horizontal well with regular slotted liner completion would only be capable of 300 to 500 barrels per day. So this was a big step change, and it was very new in the late 90s and early 2000s in Venezuela. That was a real test bed for new technology for a few years there.
I bet. And so you had a solid run there at Halliburton. And then I noticed too you had a little a good little run with Aramco, which is I don't know too many people who had the opportunity to work at a company like Aramco, which is kind of like, you know, the holy grail of oil and global oil and gas to some degree. But like tell us about your experience there.
That's one of the most interesting points in my story. When Venezuela kind of started its death spiral and it imploded and all the expats left, I went to Houston. That's when I first arrived in Houston in 2007.
Okay.
And I worked in the Houston office for 2 or 3 years as kind of a global product champion for multilaterals. And that opened up a position for me in Dubai. So I went to Dubai as the regional multilateral subject matter expert. Did some projects in Kuwait and Saudi. So then I get engaged with the Saudi guys, and they were recruiting for XPEC ARC, which is the upstream R&D group. It's about 300 scientists and engineers at that time, most of them PhDs. I'm not a PhD. I have a bachelor's degree and a lot of experience. But they hired me to work for them because I had, in the course of my multilateral background, filed about 10 patents, and I'd published maybe a dozen technical papers, SPE papers. So they're like, oh, this guy's innovative and researcher kind of guy. So they offered me the job. And at that point, I was at a turning point, right? Stay with Halliburton and probably be a lifer with Halliburton and just be a business guy. You know, they wanted to move me to Kuwait to be the business development manager for Sperry. So that would have been one path. And then I'm like, wait a minute, you know, I do like science. I do like research. So let me give this a try. I'll go work for Saudi Aramco and, you know, try to do some innovation because that's what I've always loved. I've always wanted to make better wells, whether it's with multilaterals or inflow control devices. So I took that job. And it was a bit funny because if you go to Saudi as an Aramco expat, normally everything's worked out for you. You arrive, you've got the house ready, you've got visas, and your family's all set up with schools, and you've got the 17 weeks of vacation per year and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
They didn't do that for me. They hired me to be a liaison with Aramco overseas company, and they put me in Aberdeen, Scotland to open up a satellite research center.
Wow.
So I spent a few months in Dammam getting trained, and then they shipped me off to Aberdeen, and the office wasn't even completed. I was there by myself for 3 to 4 months before some Saudi guys started showing up and some other expats. But it was the coolest role ever in one sense that once I was in Aberdeen, I could fly to Norway, I could fly to Denmark, I could work with all the innovative Scottish companies, and they would show me every piece of technology they could offer to Saudi Aramco because that's so lucrative for them. If they could get engaged with me, then they could get contracts in Saudi Arabia, and that's extremely valuable. So I loved that role. I adored it because it was such a good technology ambassador role.
Yeah.
At the same time, I only lasted a year and a half in that job.
Okay.
Even though they paid me more money than I'd ever seen.
Oh my goodness.
So the downside was, you know, Aramco is a big organization and they're very siloed, right? So I would bring back excited about this great new technology and talk to all my teammates about it. Oh, yeah, that's a great new technology. but there wasn't enough engagement with the other silos. The
Oh,
silos
okay.
being the actual assets, the operators, the guys who run the offshore fields, the guys who run Abcake, the guys who run Crace,
Yeah.
all these different assets. So it was really hard to get that technology deployed. And I'm impatient. So, I by auditioning with many, many different companies, I finally found one that I wanted to join. And at that point in time, I was a bit tired of the Scottish weather, so I took a chance on getting my family back to Houston and settling down. Because at that point, we'd moved 6 times between 6 different countries in the space of 6 years,
Yeah.
and the kids were ready for kindergarten and grade 1, so we wanted to get stable back here in Houston.
Of
So that brought me
course.
back here in 2013.
Nice. No, the point about like, and that's, again, you've traveled much more than I have, but for work, but in the oil field, there becomes a point where it's like, where are you going to plant your flag for at least, hopefully a decade while your kids are growing up? Because it is tough on kids. And I moved around a tiny bit when I was younger, but Houston's not a bad place if you're anything related to energy to kind of plant your flag for a little while, especially if you have a young family. It's a good spot. And so that was with Tendeka, right?
Yeah, I joined Tendeka in 2013, 2014.
So
And
Elizabeth
yeah, of
Camber?
course.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she took a leap of faith in the podcast world too. She helped when I was with OGGN. Tendeka was a sponsor
yeah, I
for
remember
us
that.
as well. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So small world, but yeah. So yeah, okay. Then tell us a little bit about what you did at Tendeka.
Yeah, so they brought me in as they have a few different product lines, and one of the most exciting ones was autonomous inflow control devices. And this was brand new in Norway, right? They were completing troll field with these long multilateral wells, which that's kind of the pinnacle of multilateral technology, troll field.
Oh,
It also
okay,
became the pinnacle of autonomous inflow control technology very quickly because they
got it.
used it exclusively. They're drilling under a gas cap. When gas breaks through to the producer wells, they have to shut them in because they just can't handle the GOR from this offshore subsea, you know, environment.
Yeah.
So they were very motivated to use the multilaterals to spread out the drawdown over a larger area and cone or bring the gas down more slowly. But
Mm-hmm.
also, once gas broke through, they had used ICDs, nozzles, chokes for a decade. But they wanted something that would react to the gas breakthrough and close off that gas. And that's where the autonomous ICDs came in.
Oh,
And where this starts is really interesting, Justin, because Vidar Mathiasen is our CEO and founder. He worked for Statoil in the late 2000s,
right.
and they were trying to solve this problem. Statoil became Equinor, of course. Um, they were trying to solve this problem internally. They brought in different service companies to try and say, we need something that closes for gas autonomously. Nobody had anything. None of the ideas were that great. So he's actually a fluid mechanics professor from the University of Porsgrunn. He knew how Bernoulli worked. He
Hmm.
invented that technology for Statoil, and then Statoil licensed it to a few different service companies. So my
Gotcha.
current boss was also the inventor of the RCP technology, which is by far the most commonly used autonomous device in the world. And
Ah,
then they went a few years of commercializing that technology, and he still wanted to innovate. It's a bit like me, impatient. We can do more.
yeah.
Um, but I think Statoil, I'm not going to put words in Statoil's mouth, but they were quite content with the current technology and the fact that they were getting some decent royalties off of it.
Right.
So they didn't let him do any more innovation. And that's when he left. This is not something a lot of Norwegians will do. They'll leave a high level, stable job with the national oil company to start a
Just
new business, right?
right.
But that's what Vidar, Bjornar, and Harvard did, the three founders of Inflow Control in 2011.
Wow. No, it's neat to hear that. I actually have a good buddy. I had him on the podcast. His name is Richard Sundbo. He's from Norway. And he started Bjorn Consulting, a little consulting company here in Houston. And, the first time we kind of sat down, had coffee and, just got to know each other. It was just hearing kind of the life and the culture in Norway and how different it is. But like, there's like this, I feel like there's this element of just like community and culture and just like kindness. And it's just like, to me, is like a very like healthy approach to life. And maybe you can speak on it from working with folks like that. But to your point, like people, I didn't know this, but like you can look at anyone's tax returns to see actually how much they make. And so this whole like trying to be better than you maybe are, or like trying to flex for a lot of people who don't really care about you anyways. It's like they have different values, and what they really, I guess, chase in quotations is a lot different than say folks here in the US. But I say all that to say is, like you said, like right, like in Norway, I guess it's not really like a highly driven capitalistic country from what talking to him I understand. And so like you said, it's unusual for someone like say is it Vidar is his name, correct? The
Vidar,
CEO?
yeah.
Vidar for
I
some
listened
for
to the podcast with sorry, what was his name?
Richard.
Richard, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was just nodding along with it the whole time, right? It's a
Yeah.
good podcast.
Yeah. No,
And
I just find it so interesting.
100%. It's a double-edged sword, Norwegian culture, because they
Yeah.
are very clever, very innovative. They sponsor technology in a fantastic way. If you ever want to
Yeah.
be a tech startup, go find a Norwegian partner and do it in Norway because there's lots of funding available to you.
Okay.
But at the same time, it's very socialist, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, Vidar struggled with it, the whole team in Norway. Being
I
an
bet.
innovative entrepreneur and rising above your community is not taken,
Yeah.
in the same way it would be here, right?
Right. Like down here, they put on a pedestal, like this
Yeah.
person is just like crushing business and they're making millions and this. And I would imagine that like as in Norway, it's kind of people look up at that and they're like, why are you doing that? Like, why are you risking your life? And why are we, I could just see it being a challenge. And again, I just find that the Norwegian culture, and as I've progressed in my career, I've come across more folks from Norway, and just even the dialogue over email, I find is just very comforting and very happy, and like, it's okay. Like, well, we're trying, and or
Yeah.
it's again,
Took some adjusting. Yeah.
yeah, it's a different way of doing it. But again, I appreciate it as a oil and gas being a global centric industry. I think we have to appreciate all of it and figure out a way to make it all work. You know what I mean?
They have a fantastic work-life balance there in Norway. Most of
Yeah.
Inflow Control's employees are there. I want to say the culture is changing there.
Okay. I was going
And
to ask you
that's
that.
evidenced by the fact that we won the award for Entrepreneur of the Year. Vidar accepted that award a few months ago for the
Whoa.
Southern Norwegian district, right? So they are
Very nice.
encouraging more entrepreneurism now, and
Yeah.
hopefully that has some benefit.
Yeah. No kidding. So have you had a chance? I mean, I would assuming you had a chance to go to Norway.
Yeah, and we went like I joined during COVID, right? So we couldn't travel. So for the first 2 years working for Inflow Control, I didn't have a chance to go to Porsgrunn, which is south of Oslo, about 2 hours on the train, to see the office, to see the laboratory, to see the manufacturing facility, which is all first class, beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
Fantastic multi-phase flow loops for qualifying new valves. It's
Oh,
just a world-class facility, and I encourage anybody who wants to learn more about the company to go and see that facility.
yeah.
But it's a wonderful little fishing village on the south coast of Norway.
Yeah.
And when I was there in June, it was beautiful. I rented a mountain bike and explored the entire area.
Oh,
I'm an avid mountain biker, so I just like, I'm
heck
going
yeah.
that way. That mountain, going,
No way. That is
Yeah.
so cool. It's, I would imagine that is a beautiful facility. And one thing I admire about Inflow Control is, I've noticed you guys have been posting more YouTube videos, and you guys had a pretty good library of content, but it wasn't really like pushed out there too much. And I was always telling Emily and Brown, you guys got to get out and pump more content and this and that. And I've noticed that. And so for the folks listening, I would encourage you to follow Inflow Control, because what I like about it is and I think sometimes it's Vidar doing some of the videos and some other folks, but it's purely educational. Like you get to
Hmm.
learn about like just different things, like different subsurface models or theories or calculate, or like just really getting a good understanding of things, which again, I think educating people in the right way, especially through YouTube, even though there's visuals or good little videos. So again, I think that's awesome that you guys are doing that. But so I'm curious, like, so now you've been there for a couple years. you're running North and South America. How are things going? And better yet, like is technology improving? Are we actually making better wells? Because I want to let hit the rubber hit the road here. Like, is it truly making a difference?
Oh, Justin, I've been doing this AICD stuff now for the better part of 10 years.
Yeah.
And, tried a lot of places. Not bragging, but I was instrumental in deploying the first AICDs in Canada,
Okay.
Alaska, the US, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, and I'm missing one. Typically, standing on the rig floor, deploying the first completion through the rotary table. That's what I
Whoa.
did for the better part of 10 years, up and down the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah.
And I love the technology. I see how it could work, and it wasn't quite there. And
Mm,
now we're making better wells, Justin. Like we're still
nice.
figuring out where to use it and how to use it in some cases, but
Sure.
where we've applied it, just night and day difference. This valve, we're down in Ecuador. These wells are making 25,000 barrels of water at 99% water cut. And it's just, they can't handle that much water. It's not like here in the Permian where we have a 10,000 SWD wells to get rid of the water. They're in the
Right.
middle of the jungle. Every barrel they produce has to be handled, processed, and disposed of at cost, right?
Okay.
We put two of our completions in the ground. They never made more than 5,000 barrels of water per day. They
What?
stayed below 90% water cut for 2 years, and the oil
Whoa.
rate is basically a flat line. Like this is a game changer.
So that in itself, like that story should be told 1,000 different times in a thousand different ways. And as someone who's so adamant about delivering and communicating to the masses, why are you guys not telling more of that story? Or are you? But maybe I just
Oh,
missed
trying to get it out there as much as we can. The US is a different kind of market, right? It's a very mature market. So we target conventional oil fields mostly, wells that
Okay.
produce without multi-stage frac, without, with artificial lift or without.
Well,
We're
that was going to be my next question. Is there's obviously
mhm.
wells that are more. I'd imagine there's a certain level of criteria that you say, okay, this is a perfect candidate to deploy the technology. And if someone comes to you with a well, I would imagine you guys have integrity. And you're like, look, this may not be the best case. Perhaps maybe we'll work on it in the
Yeah.
background. But like, I would imagine there's again, like here in the U.S., like everyone, all they know is unconventionals, or at least people say 40 years and younger. Like they've never drilled conventional wells. They've never done open hole completions. They've never done this. It's like, oh, you drill and you drill 2 mile laterals and you frack the living piss out of it and let's go. You know what I mean? Like that's
That's
most
it.
of the people in the US working now are
Well, it's
familiar
been
with that.
15 years of the multi-stage frac shale revolution, and now, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and they want to frac every reservoir they see, right? So it's
Yeah.
hard to say, oh no, maybe we could just produce the natural fractures or what have you. But no, I literally just wrote an email to an operator in Corpus Christi saying, sorry, this technology works on viscosity, and
Yeah.
your oil viscosity is actually lower than the water viscosity, so we wouldn't have any benefit, right? And that's a lot of the unconventional stuff is just so light, Justin, that
Mm-hmm.
we would actually be choking the oil in favor of
Got
the
it.
wood, you know. But what I'm very, very keen on doing is a lot of those Permian wells and Delaware Basin wells, they make too much gas.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah.
we can't do anything for the water with light tight oil reservoirs, we can control the GOR. We can manage gas from
Okay.
those shale reservoirs. And I'm talking to some of the super majors about doing field trials, hopefully by the end of the year in some
Yeah.
gassed out Permian fields.
Well, that's, you actually were reading my mind because one thing I had in my notes, and again, I'm one of those who, started off in early 2000s and have mainly drilled unconventionals. I did some offshore stuff for a blip, but at the end of the day, it's like, that's all I've done. And so what I was thinking, I was like, over time, I've realized that, production in the Permian, they always talk about associated gas. The takeaway capacity is a struggle. Now finally with the LNG takeaway capacity and exports that we're going to see, Mexico is going to start taking some of that Permian gas. But it's like if we could somehow manage that, I think
Yeah.
that's the bread and butter. Because I was joking with someone, I forget who I had on the podcast, And so the Permian always talks about associated gas. Well, in 10 years from now, I think we're going to be talking about associated oil, because the gas is going to be the primary production fossil fuel coming out of
but
the
in the
Permian.
meantime, these wells are running on ESP, electronic submersible pumps, electrical submersible pumps, and to move all the water and oil. And in the beginning, they have a nice IP with a great oil rate, but after a year or 2 years, it's a high water cut well that requires high volumes. So they put an ESP pump down there, and it moves all that water, and they get that oil, and they sell them. They dispose of the water through the SWD wells.
Yeah.
But then gas starts to happen, and no one's really sure how it happens. Well, someone probably is out there, but ESP pumps don't like gas, so they end up failing, and they end up replacing the pumps. So what we could do is retrofit one of these long laterals with 25 frac stages and just put 25 AICVs inside that frac liner. And wherever the gas is breaking through will be autonomously shut off. Yes. Now you can keep producing your high water cut oil well without worrying about, it'll still produce some gas, but not nearly as much as before, and not at the volumes that would damage these ESP pumps.
That is the holy grail. So going back to your, I guess, your typical well, if you were to create, say, a checklist, could you run that through? So, and give us like a high level. If your well is X, or is your well X, check mark. Does it have X, check mark? Like if there was like 5 things for someone to say, yes, 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 yes. What would that look like? What would that little checklist look like?
Okay. Oh, that's a great question. And so the first thing is it horizontal? If not, is it vertical with enough space, right? Because what we're going to do is compartmentalize your well into sections with swellable pack and put a valve in each compartment, kind of like multi-stage frac, but with swell packers and valves.
Right.
And you need to have either some thickness in your vertical well or have a long horizontal to do that.
Okay.
Secondly, do you have gas or water problems, right? That's the obvious one. Thirdly, do you have some kind of reservoir heterogeneity? I mean, if it's all one uniform sand, then you'd expect breakthrough to happen evenly everywhere. But if you have different permeabilities, or if you're drilling through different layers of your reservoir, then water or gas is going to break through somewhere first.
Right.
And that's where these valves help, right? As soon as that breakthrough event happens, the valves will see it by sensing the lower viscosity fluid traveling through it, blows that part of the well off, and allow you to produce for a much, much longer time with a better oil rate, with less, water and gas to worry about.
Right. Okay. So those are the main criteria.
Main criteria.
So let's run through this again, folks, for the kids sitting in the back. Is your well a vertical? Yes. And again, high level speaking. Do you have gas or water problems? Yes. Is your reservoir is there a level of heterogeneity? You want homogeneous or heterogeneous type reservoir?
You want some degree of reservoir heterogeneity.
Heterogeneity, right? So yes.
Contrasts and permeability and water saturation. Yeah.
Okay. So if you check the boxes, everybody, you know who to call.
Yeah.
Perfect. No, I just, again, as a drilling guy, I'm a dumb roughneck from Alberta, man. You got to dummy it down for me.
Well, yeah, me too, right? Because I spent the better part of 12 years doing drilling multilateral fishing operations. But as a petroleum engineer, I was always more in tune with the reservoir and production stuff than other drillers, right? And going back when I was a kid, my dad worked for Amaretta Hess in Alberta, and we go around and check all these gas wells, and then he had a couple of small companies, startups, where we did liquid loading gas wells with plunger lift systems. And I remember when I was 14 years old going around with him and then shooting fluid levels on pump jacks. So I've always had that production aptitude, I guess, more so than a lot of drillers. Yeah.
Gotcha. No, it makes sense. So kind of going back to Inflow and the deployment of this technology, like, what are you finding the biggest challenges for further adoption? Is it, risk associated, or is it just like, this is how we've done it, we're okay with spending way more money than we need to? Like, I guess it's like fear of change. Like, where do you see kind of the hurdle for those that you're like, I know I could help you, just please, like, where do you see the hang out
please
there?
give us a try. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of risk. If the technology were to fail, it fails open and you just keep going without the advantage of the choking, right? It's
Yeah.
not super expensive, right? It's much cheaper than replacing your ESP. We could retrofit an entire lateral with valves for less money than you would spend replacing your gassed out ESP, right? So it's not expensive.
Mm.
What's the challenge is just getting the word out there, right? Doing the marketing, contacting people, finding the right applications to do a field trial and then
Yeah.
demonstrate the value. So now we're in California. We're going to do a field trial in California, Bakersfield.
Um,
We're going to retrofit wells that are 50 years old, Justin, that make too much water. Now we're in
yeah.
Alaska. We're going to do Prudhoe Bay wells that produce very high GOR. And there's already an established precedent for this in Alaska. And
Okay.
then we're going to go into Brazil and retrofit some of their offshore wells that have high water cuts. But
Wow.
every well's a field trial right now, right? Every well's run it, test it, get the production data over 6 months or a year, and then say that thing is amazing or it didn't meet our expectations. But
Sure.
so far, all my customers are repeat customers, so that's saying something.
Right. Well, and I think too is like, and again, you're well aware of stuff like this, but it's like a lot of times there's a lot of things that again, I'm speaking from my experience in the drilling world, but there's a lot of things we do well and we don't capture the wins. And when we do, we don't necessarily know how to communicate them at a scale where more people can really understand the value. And so things like technical case studies and like making it very obvious where the value is. Because if you have to spend a bunch of energy explaining someone how it's going to help them, then they're lost, right? Especially in a day and age where to sit down and like, I mean, again, for me, the last time I've been able to sit down and give a presentation without at least one or two key stakeholders looking at their phones is like it hasn't happened in a long
Even
time, right?
technical papers, right? We try to publish SPE papers as frequently as possible, and they used to be like the gospel. You read the SPE paper and you know the truth.
Yeah.
Now there's just so many papers out there, right?
I know. And then the next thing people are gonna be on Chat GPT is like, here's my well issues. What should I do? And then hopefully you're paying Chat GPT ad money to where your shit can pop into the
Right.
response, man. Like
Gotta
it's just
monetize that.
things change. But it's just like you could have the best tool in the toolbox, but if you can't communicate it to the masses, it's useless. And again, I'm not saying that's your case, but that's where
No,
I've seen a lot of tech companies and a lot of companies trying to start up, and they think they've got the best thing since pants with pockets, and they might have, but the challenge is communicating it and marketing it, and it's tough, man.
no.
No one has the right answer, but stuff like this I think helps.
And I've got more than one customer who loves the technology and wants to keep the secret to themselves, right?
Give them that
A
competitive
really good
edge.
customer down in Colombia who's like, this is the answer for every single vertical well that has gassed out. And we have an inventory of this
Ah,
equipment on the shelf ready to go for any wells that have production problems. And, they're total sandbaggers in terms of broadcasting the value of this application, but it's huge. We've wells that would be shut in. We've done 7 wells for them, and all of them would be shut in.
yeah.
The current daily oil rate from those 7 wells is well over 1,500 barrels a day that they've been able to keep online. And they're not a huge oil company. Their total production is like 33,000 barrels a day. So this is a decent chunk of their production.
No kidding. Do you find when you have customers, are some of them hesitant to give you as much data as you would like to capture value or to be able to qualify and quantify it to then deliver to other potential customers? Or are they pretty much open book? Like, here's production before, after, whatever data you want, you can have, or like, what does that look like?
So we work with them very closely because yes, the answer is yes, right? So we
Yeah.
say, okay, we want to see how your wells produce, and we want to do free nodal analysis modeling, right?
Ah,
That's the trick. We're going to model your well for free, history match your base case completion design, and then run a scenario with our valves, demonstrate the value for you using, you know, It's not a dynamic reservoir simulator by any means, but it's nodal analysis, and we can do it relatively quickly and cheaply. So then sometimes they require a non-disclosure agreement, and that's fine.
Of
Boilerplate,
course.
sign here, sign here. Give me all the data you can get, production history, reservoir properties, PVT data, and then boom, a week later, we come back with a model that matches, and we say, this is what you're doing right now. Here's what you could get if only you deployed some AICVs down there.
Interesting. I just am like thinking out loud here, but and maybe I'm crazy to think this, but like, is there a way that, and I'm sure the modeling is challenging, and so it's probably not this easy, but it would be cool if, like, say on your website, if people could input their well criteria, and then it shot them out like a little model, and then you could be like, here, look at your well, and then like, what's your cost for this, that, and like somehow create like a calculator on your website if someone put it in, and like the dollar value associated over a certain amount of time. So like you could, or like, you know what I mean? I don't know. I just think that'd be kind of neat. I have no idea if that could do
a screening tool like that, just like this will work, yes or no. But a lot of the operators, you have to take a deep dive. Lots of times I get lab analysis on oil samples from the 1970s and 80s that give us the oil viscosity. So not everybody has that data at their fingertips. But the other aspect of it is we have a team of 10 PhDs and master's level engineers that do the subsurface modeling for us. And they're very good at it, but it takes some training, and it takes, usually we can turn out a model in less than a week.
Gotcha.
But I like your idea for a screening tool, right? Tick these boxes, and of course the answer is yes, we can help you. But
right, yeah. Again, that's what I'm saying. My idea might be completely like just smoke and mirrors, but I just thought of that because it's, again, people are always on the internet, always on their phones, and it's like a couple of clicks. It's like, holy cow, I could increase my production by 18% and lower my water. And here's whoa. I mean, again, it's I know it's not 1 + 2 = 3 kind of thing, but it's anyway, just thinking out loud. Again, fascinating stuff. I just with where we're at in oil and gas, and when I talked to Brent for the first time. And for those listening, it's Brent Brough, Brough, I believe is his last name, right? Yeah, connect with him on LinkedIn. He's putting out a ton of content, and I mean, if you put a globe in front of you, he just bounces from one spot of the world to the other, which is crazy. But again, when I was talking to him, it's just, the reality is the demand's there for more oil, especially on the petrochem side. Yes, EV adoption is going to take away gasoline, in the years to come, but the reality is we need it, and if we can produce it more sustainably and lower the amount of cost and work put into separating the waters and hauling it, and just really producing what we really need, it could completely revolutionize our industry. We may not see shale 2.0, but it could be the production revolution, and you're really only producing what you want instead of having to deal with all this other shit coming out of the hole.
Exactly.
It's like
better wells. It's not just a slogan, right?
Yeah.
Think about this, Justin. How many EVs could we be charging with the ESP pumps that are spinning water for no reason?
Great.
How much electricity does the grid consume just pumping water in West Texas? And how many EVs could we charge with that power, right? If we just had to pump less water. I'm not saying zero water. No.
Of course.
I'm saying less water. Make them more efficient. And I'm a big proponent of the energy transition. I've got a 90 kilowatt hour solar system on the roof, but we're going to need hydrocarbons for a long time. Energy abundance is a powerful thing. But we can do it better. We can do it more efficiently.
I couldn't agree more.
A spreadsheet that will tell you if you reduce your water this much based on what kind of pump you're using and what kind of grid power you're consuming, how many tons of CO2 you will save by using one of our completions to reduce that unnecessary water. And it's not zero. Like we're talking 400 tons of CO2 a month in some applications. And it's a pretty accurate calculation tool.
That's super cool. Real quick, and just like totally out of left field here, you mentioned having panels on your roof. I've considered it. Was there an easy way for you to evaluate the economics, or are you doing more of it from like an impact perspective? Again, I'm genuinely curious.
I did it for economics, and I'm consoling myself with the environmental benefit, but it's only because Texas has such cheap electricity, right? I sell
Sure.
power to the grid to the tune of probably 30 kilowatt hours per day. I
Oh, so you
buy
can sell it
power.
back?
Yeah, I don't have a
Okay, I
battery
didn't.
system. So I buy power during the evening at 12.5 cents per kilowatt hour, and they
Not
buy
bad.
my power at 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. So utility companies are making money. In the meantime, my bills with the federally guaranteed loan that you get to put one of these systems on your roof is very good. And you get the 28% tax credit for the cost of the project. It makes a lot of sense on that side
Okay.
of it. Yeah, you got to take advantage of that. But on a month-to-month basis, paying down the loan plus the power savings, I'm probably break even.
I was going to ask, net, you're at a wash
Yeah,
until a certain point. Then you're going to be winning if you stay in the house long enough, right?
right. Yeah. Yeah, and the loan's like a mortgage, right? You don't ever have to really pay it down. Probably when we sell this place, we'll deal with that then.
Gotcha,
So
gotcha. And
on a
again,
month-to-month
not
basis,
trying
it's
to,
probably break even.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, not to get in your, but you're the only one that I personally know in here in Houston who actually has solar panels. So I was curious because I've got a buddy who sells them, and again, it's kind of like, oh, it sounds good, but it's just anyway. Another story for another day.
Yeah.
Steve, this has been a great way to close out. Again, I appreciate what you're doing for the industry and all the hard work you're doing, the traveling. I know it's not easy, but one last thing, we're here in Houston. You've got a family. What does your ideal Friday night look like for you here? Or if you could have an ideal Friday night, what does that look like? I sometimes I open it with that, and now I'm closing with it. But I'm curious. But what does that look like for you, man?
Well, that's super easy for me because Friday night is kickball. I
Okay.
manage a team in the community kickball league, and every
No
Friday night for the
way.
past 8 years, we
What?
have kickball, and it's so much fun. You drink a few beers, it's baseball for old people, right? And it's a
Nice.
little bit competitive, but you can drink some beer while you're out there.
No way. Competitive kickball. Where is this happen at? Like which part of town?
Yeah, I'm in the Northeast in the Fall Creek subdivision,
Okay.
Humble. So we
Yeah.
have a sports complex that our mud district built for us, and it's got baseball diamonds. And yeah, one of my neighbors started this league 8 years ago, and we
That
have
is
a team
so
called
funny.
Kick Me in the Junk that have been somewhat competitive for the last 8 years.
Good for you. Okay. The ideal Friday night is getting on the diamond, crushing a few. I mean, what are you, what kind of beer guy are you? Like I was
Oh,
gonna say
IPAs.
kokanee, but IPAs. Okay. There you
Kokanee
go.
was my beer in Canada.
I
It's so
know
funny that you
I
say
haven't
that.
had a kokanee in so long, man. Anytime
It's
meet
not good.
someone,
Hey,
from what I remember, it was amazing. I
that's
don't
what I
know.
remember too. Go try one. They're awful.
Awesome. Well, you heard it here, folks. If you ever go to Canada, got to try kokanee. You probably won't like it, but you got to give it a shot anyways. Steven, this has been a great conversation. I genuinely appreciate your time. I appreciate Inflow and the whole team over there. What's the best way to reach out? And I'm going to put the links in the show notes, but you've got LinkedIn, you've got YouTube, you've got your guys' website. Is there anywhere else people can learn more about what you do?
The website is a wealth of information, and
Okay.
inflowcontrol.no. I got to
Right.
reinforce that because everybody puts .com, and
Yeah,
that
yeah.
takes you to a completely different entity. We are inflowcontrol.no for Norway.
Yes, yes. No, I'm glad you reminded me of that. I'm going to make sure I put that in there correctly. And for the listeners, always remember that everyone deserves access to we, and greater is greater than me. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Justin.
All right.